Welcome to Demon Sleep. I'm here to help you unwind tonight. If you enjoy this space, feel free to like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It makes this feel like a shared night across the world. These stories are different and I'm glad you're here. Dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's begin. Story 1, it sees you looking back. The mirror noticed her before she noticed herself. Alina paused just inside the doorway, keys still clenched in her hand, staring at a version of her face that refused to stay whole. The old glass fractured her reflection into pale slivers, its tarnished backing mottled with shadows that didn't quite hold still. When she shifted her gaze, the darkness seemed to rearrange itself, subtle, almost polite, like it didn't want to be caught. She swallowed and looked away. Years ago, she would have laughed this off. Years ago, she had told Sophia about it, about how the mirrors in their grandmother's house felt watchful, as if they were quietly rehearsing something behind her back. Sophia had smiled in that familiar way, tucking her hair behind her ear just like Alina did without realizing it. "Old glass plays tricks," she'd said. "You're letting your imagination wander again." 3 weeks had passed since the funeral. Now Alina studied every reflective surface as though it might confess something if she stared long enough. Windows, picture frames, the polished curve of the kettle. Grief sharpened her attention, turned silver and glass into objects of interrogation. She wasn't looking for ghosts, she was looking for forgiveness. The accident had torn through her life without warning, the way disasters always do, sudden, absolute, indifferent. One moment they were driving back from their usual dinner, debating whether to finally let go of the house that had shaped their childhood. The next, there was pain blooming behind Alina's eyes and the sensation of falling forward into noise and light. The memory refused to stay intact. It came apart when she tried to touch it. She remembered rain streaking the windshield, the steady back and forth of the wipers lulling her into a half-dream. She remembered Sophia's voice, calm but urgent, mentioning a turn up ahead. After that, nothing. Just blankness, as if someone had wiped a chalkboard clean. She woke in a hospital bed to a ceiling she didn't recognize, and a nurse whose face slid out of her memory the moment she tried to hold on to it. The words came gently, practiced, devastating all the same. Her sister hadn't made it. The house felt wrong now. Not empty in the way a place becomes when someone leaves, but altered, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The air was thin and brittle, refusing to settle properly in her lungs. Alina moved carefully, each step measured, like she was trespassing somewhere sacred. She had the uneasy sense that sudden movements might wake something. Routine became her refuge and her torment. Making coffee on her 4th morning back felt like navigating a minefield of absences. 1 mug instead of 2. No extra sugar. No familiar footsteps descending the stairs. Each small adjustment carried its own quiet cruelty, reminding her of how much space a single person could occupy simply by existing. She started doing the things Sophia used to handle. It felt safer that way, like maintaining a fragile illusion that her sister might walk in at any second, annoyed that Alina had rearranged the system. She watered the plants, folded the laundry, organized the mail. Familiar tasks, borrowed roles. That was when the reflections began to change. At first it was easy to dismiss, a trick of the light, fatigue. The house had always been old, full of creaks and optical lies. But one afternoon, as Alina rinsed her hands at the sink, she noticed her reflection blink out of sync with her own eyes. She froze. The woman in the glass smiled a heartbeat too late. Alina stepped back, pulse roaring in her ears. The reflection followed, perfectly obedient again, as if nothing had happened. She laughed, thin, humorless, and blamed the lack of sleep. That night she dreamed of mirrors lining a long hallway, each one showing a slightly different version of her life. In some, Sophia stood beside her. In others, Alina was alone, staring out from behind the glass, knocking silently as if trying to warn someone. When she woke, her bedroom mirror was fogged, though the air was cold. Words had been traced into the mist from the inside. "You're looking at it again." Alina's breath caught. Her first instinct was to run, but her feet refused to move. The letters faded slowly, leaving her own frightened face staring back. A terrible understanding settled over her. The mirrors hadn't been watching her. They had been waiting for her to notice the spaces where memory broke, waiting for her to stop looking away from the moment that never came back whole. In the fractured glass, she finally saw it, the flash of headlights, the mist turn, her own hands tightening on the wheel as Sophia spoke too late. The reflections didn't judge, they remembered. As Alina reached out, pressing her palm against the cold surface, the woman in the mirror did the same, from the other side. And for the first time since the accident, Alina understood the truth she had been avoiding. Some things don't disappear when we refuse to see them. They just learn how to look back. The plants on the kitchen sill had begun to wilt. Sophia had always known exactly how much water they needed, how to angle the pots so each leaf caught the light just right. Alina forced herself to tend to them anyway. She wiped dust from the delicate teacups lining the cabinet shelves, the same ones their grandmother had owned, the same ones Sophia had arranged by instinct rather than logic. Every task felt wrong in Alina's hands, like she was stepping into a life that had never been meant for her. She had never been this person. Alina had always lived quietly, comfortably in the background. While Sophia filled rooms with laughter and conversation, Alina filled notebooks. She noticed things, tiny mismatches in routine, expressions that didn't fit words, pauses people didn't realize they made. Sophia shone. Alina observed. That had always been the balance. Even their grandmother had leaned towards Sophia in the end, saving her stories for the brighter twin. Tales of ancestors, whispered scandals, tragedies that seemed to echo through bloodlines like a warped melody played again and again. Alina remembered sitting nearby, half invisible, listening as those stories were softened or cut short the moment Sophia entered the room. But not all of them. Some fragments had been left behind. Now, alone in the house, Alina began to understand the weight of what she'd absorbed without meaning to. Details filed away, half-finished sentences, the things considered too unsettling to share with someone so full of life. One memory rose sharply as she sank into their grandmother's old chair by the kitchen window. Rain slid down the glass in slow trails, blurring the world outside until it looked like it was dissolving. That afternoon from years ago came back with painful clarity. Her grandmother hunched over a box of photographs, fingers stiff and trembling as she paused on one image. Two young women stared back from the faded print. They could have been Alina and Sophia. The Ashwood women, her grandmother had murmured, not quite speaking to Alina at all. We've always noticed things others miss. It's not a blessing the way people think. Sometimes it's a weight you carry alone. Alina had asked who the women were. Too quickly, the photograph disappeared back into the box. Her grandmother claimed she couldn't remember where it came from, but Alina had already seen the date scrawled on the back, the ink nearly erased by time. 1911. Now, sitting in the same chair, Alina felt the unease she'd ignored for years tighten around her chest. What if those words hadn't been rambling at all? What if they were a warning? The house seemed alert, as though it had been paying attention long before Alina ever returned. Every groan of old wood, every sigh of wind through the window frames felt deliberate, expectant, as if something had been patiently waiting for her to notice. Then, in the corner of her vision, she saw Sophia. Not fully, not yet. It happened on the third day after she came home. Alina was standing in the upstairs bathroom, the one she and Sophia had shared since childhood, foam clinging to her lips as she brushed her teeth on autopilot. The room was quiet in that heavy, early morning way, broken only by the soft scrape of bristles and the hum of the pipes. Then movement. Not straight ahead, not fully formed, just a presence sliding through the edge of the mirror. Her heart jumped. She spun around, toothpaste dripping into the sink, eyes locking onto the open doorway behind her. Empty. The hallway stretched back in silence, unchanged, innocent. No footsteps, no breath, nothing. Slowly, she turned back to the mirror. Only her own face stared back at her, washed out, hollow-eyed, grief carved deep into familiar features. And yet something about the moment felt wrong. The timing didn't line up. It was as if the mirror had hesitated before deciding what to show her. Her hands began to shake. She set the toothbrush down carefully, afraid that any sudden movement might confirm what she already suspected. For a fraction of a second, the reflection had shown her someone else. She tried to reason it away. People saw the dead after loss, she knew that. She had studied it once back when her life still followed plans. The mind, overwhelmed by absence, recreated presence. A survival instinct, memory disguised as comfort. She clung to those explanations like scripture. But they didn't fit. Hallucinations didn't lag. Grief didn't cause reflections to fall out of step with reality. What she'd seen wasn't an image layered over the world. It had obeyed different timing, different rules. That thought followed her long after she left the bathroom. From that day on, Alina watched mirrors the way a scholar studies dangerous texts, with focus, patience, and a growing sense of dread. She noticed how the dark speckling in old glass seemed to drift when her eyes weren't fixed on it. How shadows passed through reflections without any corresponding movement in the room. Most disturbing of all was the delay. A blink that finished just a breath too late. A raised hand echoed a heartbeat after she moved, so subtle she might have missed it if she hadn't been looking for it. And then there were the appearances. Sophia never showed herself in windows, not in polished metal, not in water, only mirrors. Always just behind Alina's shoulder, always calm, always watching. She wore the same blue dress every time. She always appeared wearing the same thing. Alina noticed it one quiet afternoon when the reflection shifted just enough for recognition to settle in. The soft sweater, the familiar color, the one Sophia had unwrapped with a laugh the last winter they spent together. Seeing it again felt like a hand closing around Alina's chest, squeezing until memory and pain blurred into the same sharp sensation. That was when the rules truly broke. The image in the glass no longer behaved like an echo. Alina would lift a brush to her hair, and in the mirror, a different motion would unfold, fingers rising to a throat, a gesture of hesitation she hadn't made. At times, she swore the reflection lingered in a stare after she blinked, holding its gaze just a moment longer than her own eyes remained open. Whenever she tried to catch it in the act, the strangeness slipped away. The glass returned to obedience, smooth and ordinary, as if nothing had ever been wrong. But the damage was done. It wasn't just the impossible nature of what she was seeing that disturbed her. It was the doubt it planted. If the mirror could lie so convincingly, then what else had she accepted without question? How much of the world depended on trust in things that merely pretended to be stable? Instinct took over where comfort failed. Alina began studying the mirrors with quiet discipline, approaching them at dawn, at dusk, beneath harsh bulbs and dim shadows. She kept track of every detail, hoping to uncover a pattern, a cause, a rule she could hold on to. But the results refused to settle into sense. Some days, Sophia stood clearly behind her, unmistakable and still. Other days, there was only a blur, a hint of motion that vanished before it could be understood. And sometimes there was nothing at all, just Alina's own reflection, thinner, paler, unraveling under the weight of watching. The uncertainty gnawed at her more than the visions ever could. Each time she stepped toward a mirror, her heart pulled in opposite directions. Part of her ached to see her sister again, even as a ghost trapped in glass. Another part recoiled in fear, whispering that every sighting pushed her further from sanity. Want and terror braided together, tightening until every day felt like a quiet endurance test. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore. Alina began removing mirrors from her life piece by piece. She draped fabric over the one in her bedroom. She avoided the small bathroom downstairs unless there was no other choice. She brushed her teeth staring at cracked paint and tiled walls, refusing to let her eyes drift even a few inches toward her reflection. But the house would not cooperate. Mirrors seemed to wait for her, hidden in narrow corridors, set into old wardrobes, tucked into the doors of cabinets she couldn't avoid opening. No matter how carefully she planned her movements, the glass found her. And every time it did, Alina felt the same chilling certainty. Something in the house wanted to be seen. No matter how careful she became, she never managed to find them all. Alina would convince herself she had mapped every reflective surface in the house, only to turn a corner and come face to face with another slab of glass, its surface waiting, expectant. Each surprise left her tense, braced for whatever might be looking back. Avoidance came with a cost. Without the daily habit of meeting her own eyes, Alina began to feel strangely detached from her body, as if she were slowly fatting from herself. Occasionally, she'd catch her reflection in a dark window and flinch. The woman staring back looked unfamiliar, too thin, hollowed by exhaustion, marked by shadows that spoke of nights without rest and meals forgotten. She resembled a stranger Alina might pass on the street without a second glance. It unsettled her, how easily she could become unrecognizable. The first real crack in the family silence came from someone outside the house. Mrs. Petton from the village arrived one afternoon carrying a warm casserole and the sort of practiced compassion that small towns wield in times of loss. Her presence filled the kitchen with life, pots clinking, water boiling, chairs pulled out without asking. She moved through the space as though it were meant for people who still gathered and spoke, not for quiet grief. The normalcy hurt almost as much as it helped. She spoke gently, efficiently, offering comfort without dramatics. Then, as she settled into a chair, she sighed and shook her head. "Such a terrible thing," she said. "And after all your family's trouble with twins, your grandmother must have worried herself sick. Bless her." Alina froze. The words slipped by so casually as if they were common knowledge. Family trouble, twins. She turned slowly, suddenly aware of every sound in the room. Mrs. Petton noticed the change immediately. Her teacup stopped midway to her mouth, her eyes widening with the realization that she had said something she wasn't meant to. "Oh dear, I thought you knew," she said carefully. Elena waited, her pulse loud in her ears. "There were others," Mrs. Petton continued after a pause. "Back in your great-grandmother's day. Twins weren't uncommon in your family, but things happened. Strange things." She shook her head, lips pressing together. "Perhaps I shouldn't go on. Your grandmother always believed some stories were better left alone." The sentence lingered in the air, unfinished and heavy. "Let the past stay buried." Elena felt the words settle deep inside her, cold and deliberate, as if something old had just shifted beneath the floorboards of the house. The words hung between them, heavy and unfinished, daring her to push. And Elena did. Something long dormant stirred in her chest, an old, familiar pull she hadn't felt since before the accident. Curiosity, the disciplined hunger to understand, to trace patterns, to uncover what lay beneath the surface. Mrs. Petton's hesitation only sharpened it. "Please," Elena said quietly, leaning forward. "If there's something in our family's past, something that explains what's happening to me, I need to know." Mrs. Petton studied her face with care, as though searching for cracks she might make worse. At last, she exhaled and placed her teacup down with a finality that suggested the decision had been made. "Your great-great-grandmother had twin daughters," she began. "Late 19th century, beautiful by all accounts." She hesitated, then continued. "But people said there was something off about them. They were closer than most twins, too close. They seemed to share things that shouldn't be shared." Elena felt the room grow colder. "They knew each other's pain," Mrs. Petton said, "finished each other's thoughts, and they spent hours speaking to mirrors, not admiring themselves, talking, as if the glass answered back. Folks noticed their reflections never quite behaved as they should." A chill crept through Elena, sharp and undeniable. The similarities pressed in on her from all sides. "What happened to them?" she asked. "One died young," Mrs. Petton replied. "An accident officially, but there were always whispers." She paused, eyes dropping to her hands. "The other stayed here, lived a long life but never a peaceful one. She said her sister was still with her, trying to warn her, trying to cross back." Mrs. Petton swallowed. "They found her one morning in the front hall, in front of the largest mirror. It looked as though she'd been pulling herself into it." Silence followed, thick and oppressive. When Mrs. Petton finally left, she took her polite cautions and unfinished sentences with her, but the damage was done. Elena felt drawn, pulled, toward parts of the house she'd avoided her entire childhood. That night, armed with a flashlight and a growing sense of dread, she climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. Dust coated everything. Old trunks, crates of forgotten lives, 6 generations of secrets packed away and ignored. And there, buried beneath brittle fabric and time, she found it. A diary bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed and fragile. The name inside was unmistakable. And as Elena opened it, the mirror downstairs creaked softly, as if something had been waiting for her to read. The name on the cover caught the light first. C. Ashwood pressed into worn leather, the gold lettering nearly erased by time. Inside, the writing was precise and elegant, every line shaped with care. Elena felt a tightening in her chest as she read. The words weren't just familiar, they were echoing her life back to her. Clara and Catherine Ashwood, twin sisters, born in 1892. The early pages were gentle, almost comforting. Notes about gatherings in town, expectations placed upon young women, quiet rivalries masked as affection. A normal life, written plainly. But as Alina turned page after page, the handwriting remained neat while the story itself unraveled. Catherine began losing hours. She would appear in rooms with no memory of arriving there, meals prepared without recollection, furniture rearranged by hands she couldn't remember moving, letters written in her name that she didn't recall composing. Clara's concerns seeped through the careful script, growing heavier with each entry. Then came the mirrors. Catherine wrote of seeing reflections that did not belong to her, faces that lingered after she stepped away, conversations carried on with images in the glass that continued speaking long after she had left the room. Clara described standing in doorways, listening to her sister talk softly to empty air. The doctor blamed exhaustion, grief. Their parents had died the winter before, taken by illness within days of each other. But Clara noticed something far worse than sorrow taking hold. Catherine began to forget who she was. She answered to the wrong name, spoke of memories that belonged to Clara, recalled moments she had never lived. It was as if the boundary between them had begun to erode, identity thinning like worn fabric. The final pages were barely readable. The letters twisted and crowded one another, urgency bleeding through every line. Catherine had not died in a riding accident, as the village records claimed. She had walked calmly into the pond behind the house before sunrise. Clara found her floating among the water lilies, face turned toward the sky. The last entry trembled with fear. She told me she finally understood, Clara wrote. She said she had been living the wrong life, that the mirror had been trying to show her the truth. She said she was not Catherine at all, that she had forgotten her real name. I do not know what she meant, but I fear I am beginning to see it too. Sometimes when I look into the mirror, Catherine looks back at me, and I no longer know which of us truly exists. Alina snapped the diary shut. Her hand shook so badly the flashlight slipped, clattering against the attic floor. Her breath came shallow and fast as realization settled in, cold and absolute. The patterns, the mirrors, the slipping sense of self. This wasn't coincidence. It was inheritance. That night, sleep dragged her into silver-lit corridors lined with glass. Voices whispered her name from places that should not exist. Reflections moved before she did. And when she woke, her heart racing in the dark, she knew with terrible certainty. The story wasn't finished with her yet. She woke with the taste of rain on her tongue, and laughter still ringing in her ears. For a fragile instant, balanced between dreaming and consciousness, Alina was certain Sophia was there. Not a memory, not an echo, a presence, warm, familiar, close enough to reach for. Then the feeling collapsed, leaving only the quiet room and the hollow certainty of being alone. Sleep no longer felt safe after that. Alina turned her focus outward, toward facts, solid things that could be held and examined. She requested the accident report through official channels, filling out forms with steady hands, telling herself that clarity lived on paper. 3 days later, the envelope arrived. She laid the documents across the kitchen table with deliberate precision, like an excavation. Every page was handled carefully, every word absorbed. The language was sterile, stripped of emotion, yet somehow heavier for him. The vehicle had left the road on a bend. Rain, reduced visibility, impact with an oak tree that had stood there longer than anyone in town could remember. Both occupants unconscious. One pronounced dead before reaching the hospital. Cause, driver error. It should have ended there. But one line stopped her cold. The first responders' notes detailed the positions in which the women were found. According to the report, Alina had been discovered in the passenger seat, Sophia behind the wheel. Alina stared at the words until they blurred. That wasn't right. Her memory resisted violently. She remembered gripping the wheel, remembered choosing the longer road to avoid traffic, remembered the sudden terror when she realized the curve was closer than expected, the car moving too fast on wet pavement. She had been driving. Her hands curled into fists as she turned the page. An inventory of personal effects followed, items recovered at the hospital. 2 handbags, contents mixed together, damaged by rain pouring through shattered glass. Identification documents blurred and partially destroyed. The initial identification, the report explained, had been provisional due to the twins' identical appearance, later confirmed through records and family notification. Alina read the list once, then again. Her pulse began to pound when she noticed the discrepancy. The belongings assigned to Alina Ashwood, the passenger, included a receipt from the restaurant they had visited that night. She knew it instantly. The tip amount leapt off the page. Too generous. Sophia had always tipped that way, rounding up without hesitation. Alina never did. She calculated. She remembered numbers. Her fingers trembled as realization crept in, slow and unbearable. If the positions were wrong, if the belongings were mixed, if the mirrors had been showing her truth she refused to see, then the accident hadn't just taken her sister. It might have taken her place. Numbers had always grounded her. Precision, logic, patterns that obeyed rules. That was why the next discovery shattered her. Inside a plain envelope marked additional documentation, Alina found copies of hospital records, files used to verify the twins' identities after the accident. Her own discharge papers lay neatly stacked on top. Beneath them were records for the twin who hadn't survived, stamped as requested by family weeks after the crash. Alina frowned. She didn't remember asking for these. Her breath caught as she lifted the request form. There, unmistakable, was her signature, dated 3 weeks earlier, written in her hand, careful, intentional. She stared at it for a long time, waiting for memory to surface. Nothing came. That evening, she cooked a simple meal and ate alone at the kitchen table, forcing herself to focus on the ordinary. The scrape of cutlery, the warmth of food, the small comforts of habit. The house felt cavernous, its silence pressing inward until it rang in her ears. She washed the dishes slowly, deliberately, dried them, returned each one to its place. These routines had become lifelines, proof that some parts of the world still followed order. As she turned from the sink, her gaze caught on the darkened window above it. At first, she saw only herself, a woman in her early 30s who looked worn beyond her years, hair dulled by neglect, eyes ringed with shadows that no amount of sleep seemed to erase. Then another shape emerged beside her. Sophia stood there, clear as breath on glass. She wore the same blue sweater from the night everything ended. Only now, something darker bled through the fabric, spreading outward like a stain Alina refused to study too closely. Sophia's lips moved urgently, shaping words with silent insistence. Alina's heart pounded. Her name formed in the glass. Alina. You have to remember. She spun around, pulse screaming, already knowing what she would find. Nothing. The kitchen stood empty beneath the harsh overhead light. No movement, no warmth, No trace of anyone else. When she turned back to the window, Sophia was still there, her expression tightening with panic. "Remember what?" Elena asked aloud, the sound of her own voice thin and unsteady. The reflection leaned closer, eyes pleading. And for the first time, Elena felt certain of one thing. The mirror wasn't trying to deceive her. It was trying to give something back. Sophia's face slipped away before Elena could take another breath. The glass darkened, returning to its empty reflection, and Elena stood frozen with her heart hammering against her ribs. The certainty settled in fast and heavy that something inside her was breaking, quietly and beyond repair. Sleep abandoned her after that. Night after night, she lay awake staring into the dark, cataloging every sound the house produced. The groan of wood adjusting to the cold, the faint tick of pipes. Sometimes too clearly to ignore, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her room. Not random, familiar. The exact cadence of Sophia's walk, a rhythm Elena had known since childhood. Each time, fear held her still until she forced herself out of bed to look. Each time the hallway was empty. But the house was no longer staying put. Objects began appearing where they shouldn't. A book rested on a side table she hadn't touched in days. A mug sat clean and dry on the kitchen counter, though she had no memory of washing it. Once, she opened the door to the spare room and found Sophia's clothes laid neatly across the bed, as if someone had stepped away mid-morning, planning to return. Elena closed the door without entering. She tried to reason through it all. Trauma could fracture memory. Grief could hollow out hours, leave gaps filled by unconscious action. Maybe she was moving things herself, slipping into dissociation without realizing it. Maybe she was wandering the house at night, recreating domestic order to keep her sister close. The explanation sounded plausible. The mirrors disagreed. Sophia began appearing more often, her image sharper, more insistent. She no longer lingered quietly behind Elena's shoulder. She gestured, pointed, reached toward corners of rooms Elena didn't understand. At times her reflection twisted with anger, mouth forming silent warnings. Other times she looked unbearably sad, tears streaming down her face that left no trace on the glass. And sometimes, worst of all, Sophia pointed directly at Elena. Her expression then wasn't rage or grief. It was accusation. Elena started writing everything down. She kept a journal on the bedside table, recording each appearance with meticulous detail. The time, the weather, the room, the expression on Sophia's face. She noted her own thoughts before and after, her emotional state, the memories that had surfaced. When she read back through the pages, patterns emerged that made her stomach knot. The sightings clustered around rainstorms. They intensified near dusk, when daylight thinned and shadows stretched long. And they grew strongest whenever Elena found herself thinking about the accident, about the curve in the road, the slick pavement, the moment of impact she could never quite reach. It was as if the mirrors were responding not to chance, but to memory. And whatever Sophia was trying to say, it was getting harder for her to hold it back. 2 months after the funeral, Elena made a decision that surprised even herself with its sudden clarity. She would return to the place where everything had ended, the curve in the road where Sophia had died, and face it head-on. Maybe standing there, breathing the same air, touching the scarred earth, would unlock the memories her mind had buried. Maybe, finally, she could hear what her sister had been trying to tell her. The drive carried her through town, past the restaurant where they had shared their last dinner. She had avoided this route for weeks, But now she found herself studying every storefront, every lamppost, with the intensity of someone seeing them for the first time. The world looked smaller than she remembered, quieter, almost insignificant against the weight of what had happened. The curve lay just 3 miles outside of town. She had traveled it countless times over the years. In the harsh light of day, it seemed impossible that a car could have gone off the road there. The bend was gentle, visibility clear, the pavement smooth. She parked on the shoulder and approached the oak tree that still bore the mark of the crash. Its bark had begun to heal, but the gouges remained, a raw, permanent scar. As she leaned closer, something caught her eye, a small card tucked into the wounded bark. Fingers trembling, she pulled it free. It was a business card for a monument company. On the back, in handwriting she knew as her own, a note. Memorial stone ordered November 15th. Delivery arranged for November 30th. 3 weeks ago, and she had no memory of it. Her gaze dropped to the base of the tree and her breath hitched. There, set against the earth, was a small granite memorial, elegant, simple, but it bore not her name as she might have feared, but Sophia, beloved sister, never forgotten. Alina's knees nearly gave way as comprehension dawned. In one of those lost, unremembered hours, some part of her mind had acted. Even when her conscious self couldn't face it, some deeper awareness had known that Sophia deserved to be remembered properly. And now, before her eyes, the proof stood silent and permanent. But if she had been capable of arranging a memorial, of writing checks, making calls, coordinating deliveries, what else had she done during those missing stretches of time? What decisions had been made? What doors opened? What promises kept by a version of herself she couldn't remember being? Alina lowered herself onto the grass beside the stone, the cold seeping through her clothes. She tried to stitch together the holes in her memory. The medical records that had arrived in neat envelopes she didn't recall requesting. The warm meals waiting in her kitchen, still steaming as if prepared by unseen hands. Sophia's belongings, scarves, books, photographs, appearing throughout the house in careful, deliberate arrangements. A terrible thought took shape. What if there had never been anything supernatural at all? What if grief had splintered her mind, creating a separate awareness, one that could function, plan, and act while her primary self remained trapped in denial? She was turning this over when something flickered at the edge of her vision. Alina looked up. In the side mirror of her parked car, she saw herself, but not as she was now. The reflection was tense, frantic. Her own face stared back at her, eyes wide, mouth moving rapidly as if pleading. The intensity of it made Alina's breath catch. She stood and stepped closer. The woman in the mirror leaned forward too, lips forming words Alina couldn't hear. Her expression wasn't empty or hollow like Sophia's reflections had been. It was desperate, furious, terrified, trying to warn her. For the first time, a possibility surfaced that chilled her deeper than any ghost ever could. What if the figure in the mirrors had never been Sophia? What if it had always been Alina? A buried fragment of her consciousness, clawing at the surface, trying to shatter the carefully constructed illusion her traumatized mind had built to survive. She tore her gaze away and drove home with that thought lodged in her chest like a stone. The sky darkened as clouds rolled in, heavy with the promise of rain. She wanted to reach the familiar walls of Ashwood House before nightfall, before her thoughts could spiral any further. But as she turned into the long driveway, unease washed over her. Someone had been there. The front door, she was certain she had locked it, stood slightly open. Warm light glowed from the windows, though she had no memory of leaving any lamps on. And then she heard it. Music, drifting softly from inside the house. The same song that had played the night Sophia died. Had never been the one who survived. The truth unfolded with brutal clarity. Sophia had been driving that night. She remembered it now, not as an image, but as a certainty that settled deep in her bones. The curve in the road, the sudden loss of control, the impact that shattered glass and bone alike. Alina hadn't died instantly. She had died slowly, cradled in Sophia's arms, bleeding out while sirens wailed somewhere far away. Sophia had survived, but survival had come at a cost her mind could not bear. Standing in the bathroom, staring into the mirror, she finally understood. The person she had been calling Alina, the careful, rational woman trying to explain everything away, was a construct, a refuge, a story her fractured mind had invented to escape unbearable guilt. The mirrors hadn't been haunted, they had been honest. Sophia leaned closer to the glass. The woman staring back no longer looked accusing or frantic. She looked relieved, as if the long struggle to be seen was finally over. "I'm sorry," Sophia whispered, to the reflection, to the empty house, to the memory of the sister she had loved more than her own life. The house creaked softly around her, settling into silence. The music downstairs faded as the radio clicked off, whether by chance or design she couldn't say. What mattered was this: the haunting was over. Not because the dead had found peace, but because the living had finally remembered who she truly was. By unbearable guilt and grief, then the mirrors were not portals to the dead. They were moments of truth, cracks in the illusion where reality pushed back. As dawn crept closer, Sophia, no longer certain which name truly belonged to her, sat on the floor of the hallway, surrounded by glass. Every mirror told the same story now. Not a haunting, not a warning from beyond, but a memory that refused to stay buried. She had loved her sister too deeply to accept responsibility for her death. So her mind had done what wounded minds have done for centuries. It protected her by lying. It split the unbearable truth in two and handed her a version of reality she could survive inside. Alina lived. Sophia died. That story had allowed her to wake up each morning, to eat, to breathe, to exist. But the mind cannot maintain such a life forever. The reflections had not been trying to scare her. They had been trying to heal her, forcing her, piece by piece, to confront the truth she had locked away. The missing hours, the automatic routines, the way grief moved her body even when her thoughts were elsewhere. These were not signs of madness in the way she had feared. They were signs of a mind fighting its way back toward wholeness. When the sun finally rose, its pale light softened the house, stripping the mirrors of their power. They showed only one woman now, exhausted, hollow-eyed, but finally present. No sister beside her, no accusing ghost, just herself. Sophia whispered Alina's name one last time, not as a denial, but as a farewell. The haunting was never supernatural. It was grief refusing to be forgotten, and memory, patient and relentless, finally being remembered. The truth crept in quietly, not like a scream, but like a whisper that refused to fade. What if the figure in the mirrors was never a ghost at all? What if it was the mind's last defense against a truth too heavy to carry? Once that thought took root, everything she thought she knew began to unravel. The lost hours, the strange sense of arriving in rooms without remembering the walk that brought her there. The house that seemed to rearrange itself when she wasn't looking. Meals that appeared warm and ready. cooked in a style she couldn't quite claim as her own. None of it needed an otherworldly explanation anymore. It only required a fractured mind doing its best to survive. And survival, she realized, can be cruel. If this new understanding was true, then the life she'd been living since the crash wasn't real at all. She wasn't the quiet twin spared by fate. She wasn't the one left behind to mourn. She was the one who caused the wreck, the one who lived when she shouldn't have, the one who woke up in a hospital bed carrying a guilt so unbearable that her mind rewrote reality itself. She fought the idea with everything she had. Paperwork could be wrong, labels could be mixed up. In chaos, mistakes happen, and her memories felt solid. She remembered being careful, reserved, methodical. She remembered living a life that fit her skin perfectly. Nothing about her body felt unfamiliar. Nothing about her reflection felt like a stranger. But at night, when the house settled into its long, ancestral silence, doubt crept back in. The old walls had seen generations of twins born, raised, broken. The house didn't feel like a place she was merely staying in. It felt like a place she belonged to in ways she couldn't explain. So she began to test herself. Small things at first. She'd leave an object somewhere deliberate and exact, then check later. Sometimes it was gone. Sometimes it reappeared in places she would never have chosen, but her sister would have. She wrote obsessively, filling notebooks with timestamps, tasks, thoughts. Slowly, patterns emerged. Entire stretches of time dissolved into blank space. Days folded in on themselves. There were moments when the handwriting in her journal shifted slightly, familiar yet distant, like a voice echoing from another room. Then she found proof she couldn't argue with. A list. Groceries written in her own hand, but not her habits. Foods she never bought. Brands she never chose. Preferences that belonged to someone else entirely. Her chest tightened as understanding settled in. She hadn't been haunted. She had been divided. The mind that looked back at her from reflective surfaces wasn't an intruder. It was the part of her that refused to participate in the lie. The part that remembered the steering wheel slick with rain. The curve that came too fast. The moment of impact that ended one life and shattered another. The identity she had been living under wasn't stolen out of malice. It was borrowed out of love, out of desperation, out of a need to keep her sister alive in some form, even if only by becoming her. The realization didn't come with relief. It came with grief so deep it felt physical. Because remembering meant accepting the one thing she had been running from since the night of the crash. She had survived, and her sister had not. And no matter how carefully the mind rearranges reality, the truth always finds its way back to the surface. Somewhere along the way, the evidence stopped feeling accidental. It began with small discoveries that carried heavy weight. A handwritten shopping list tucked into a drawer, items she never remembered craving, foods chosen with a taste that wasn't hers. A business card from the stone company, creased and worn, bearing proof of decisions made in moments she couldn't recall. Library books checked out under her name, yet stamped with dates that landed squarely inside the blank spaces of her memory. Her life, it seemed, had been lived in shifts. 3 weeks after standing beside the oak tree and feeling reality fracture, she finally reached out for help. She drove to the neighboring town and sat across from Dr. Bennett, a psychiatrist whose reputation was built on patience rather than quick answers. This time, there were no half-truths. She spoke of the mirrors, the missing hours, the creeping suspicion that even her name might be a lie she had learned to believe. Dr. Bennett didn't flinch. She listened the way only someone seasoned by decades of human suffering could, steady, attentive, grounded. When questions came, they were gentle, precise. And when Alina finished, the doctor didn't speak of ghosts or madness. She spoke of the mind's will to survive. Severe trauma, especially the loss of a twin, can fracture identity, she explained. Guilt can carve fault lines through consciousness. In rare cases, the psyche builds an alternate self, not out of confusion but protection. Memory gaps, living a life that feels borrowed, seeing one's reflection as something separate. These weren't impossibilities, they were patterns. There was a plan, careful therapy, medication to steady the dissociation, even the suggestion of temporary inpatient care, a controlled environment where healing could begin safely. But Alina knew, deep down, she wasn't ready to leave the house. Ashwood House held answers no clinic could provide. The mirrors there were different. They didn't judge. They didn't diagnose. They reflected something raw and honest, something that still remembered. She filled the prescription, folded the paper carefully, and placed it in her bag. But she didn't take the pills. Not yet. What if quieting her mind meant silencing the one part of her that still knew the truth? What if the symptoms weren't the illness, but the message? So she chose one last test. She would go back to the place where everything began, not to remember, but to witness. This time she wouldn't rely on her mind alone. She would bring a camera, something objective, something that couldn't lie the way memory could. If the truth was real, she decided, it would finally show itself, whether she was ready for it or not. If she truly was slipping into unseen states, acting, deciding, grieving without memory, then proof might finally break the illusion. A camera wouldn't bend to fear or denial. It would simply record what happened. She drove back to the oak tree on a gray afternoon, rain streaking the windshield in a way that felt uncomfortably familiar. The sky hung low and heavy, mirroring the night everything had shattered. She pulled onto the shoulder, set up the camera on its stand, and aimed it carefully so it could see both the scarred tree and her moving through the frame. Then she stepped away, heart pounding, and approached the site once more. That was when she saw it. The stone was still there, but it was no longer alone. Resting at its base was a small bundle of fresh white flowers, their petals clean and unblemished despite the rain. They hadn't been there before. She was certain of that. Alina froze, a chill creeping through her chest as she stared down at them. She hadn't brought flowers. At least, she didn't remember bringing them. The implication settled in slowly, like cold water rising. If she had placed them there without knowing it, then whatever part of her had been acting in the shadows was growing stronger, more deliberate. No longer just rearranging objects or cooking meals, but mourning. She crouched beside the stone, studying the flowers more closely, and that was when recognition struck like a blow. They weren't just flowers she liked. They were the same ones chosen for the funeral. She remembered standing in the quiet room, selecting those exact blooms. Remembered their pale color against dark wood. Remembered the weight of the moment with unsettling clarity. But funerals are for the dead. And the memory didn't make sense. The thought unraveled everything. If she remembered the service, if she remembered the flowers laid beside the casket, then who exactly had been inside it? Her breath caught as the realization finally forced its way to the surface. What if the fracture wasn't partial? What if the mind she trusted had split cleanly in two? What if Alina, the survivor, was never real at all? Just a story constructed so that Sophia could keep living without facing the truth of her own guilt. Her gaze drifted toward the camera. Hands shaking, she walked back and stopped the recording, then rewound the footage. On the small screen, she watched herself moving through the scene, too fast, too restless. She saw her own mouth moving, words spilling out to no one. She saw gestures made toward empty space, pauses where she seemed to listen, nods as if responding to a voice only she could hear. It wasn't the calm, grieving woman she believed herself to be. It was someone unraveling. And for the first time, watching herself from the outside, Alina understood with terrifying clarity that the person she thought she was might be nothing more than a reflection, while the truth stood just beyond the glass, waiting to be acknowledged. Twin, bearing the weight of the past, yet finally standing in her own reality. Returning to Ashwood House was like stepping into a world that had always belonged to her, but had been veiled behind layers of illusion. The hallways smelled faintly of old wood and dust, but they no longer whispered secrets she couldn't trust. Each creak of the floorboards, each shadow cast by the fading afternoon light, felt anchored in the truth rather than in the hallucinations of a mind desperate to survive grief. Sophia approached the bathroom mirror, the same one that had reflected months of fear, confusion, and phantom messages. And this time she saw only herself. No ghostly sister, no delayed gestures, just the woman who had lived every day carrying the consequences of one catastrophic night. She studied her own eyes, darkened by sleepless nights and guilt, but alive with the faint spark of acceptance. She whispered her real name aloud, a name she had avoided speaking for so long, Sophia Ashwood. And in that sound, the final thread of the delusion unraveled. The work ahead would not be easy. She would call Dr. Bennett again, this time to face her dissociation head-on. The therapy would be painstaking, confronting the reality of having lost her twin by her own hand, dismantling the coping mechanisms that had kept her trapped in Alina's life. Every journal entry, every misplaced object, every memory that had felt like a clue from beyond would now serve as evidence of her fractured mind and the pathway toward integrating it. Days became weeks. Sophia learned to inhabit her own body, reclaim her routines, and rebuild her sense of self. Mirrors were no longer harbingers of impossible truths. They were simply mirrors, reflecting the woman she had been all along, occasionally in their surfaces. She caught glimpses of Alina's features, shared smiles, familiar shapes of eyes and jaw, and felt a bittersweet recognition, not as a phantom, but as a memory of the sister she had loved. Sophia stopped trying to become Alina. She was no longer haunted by guilt projected into glass. She was guided by truth. Step by step, she reclaimed her life from the shadows of grief and delusion, learning that surviving tragedy did not mean erasing herself, but honoring both who she was and the sister she had lost. Ashwood House remained, antique and spotted with age, a vessel of memory rather than illusion. And in its quiet halls, Sophia Ashwood finally saw herself clearly, and for the first time she was home. Sophia would always carry that burden. There was no escaping it, no rewriting the past into something kinder. Alina's death would remain the axis around which her life turned, a truth she would have to face every morning and every night. But she made a quiet promise to herself, not to disappear under the weight of it. She would remember Alina not as a ghost trapped in glass, but as a living presence carried forward through choice, restraint, and the discipline of enduring what could not be undone. The house seemed to sense the shift. Its silence changed character, settling into something calmer, something honest. It was no longer the suffocating stillness of avoidance, where every shadow felt watchful and every reflection accused her. This was the ordinary quiet of a home inhabited by someone willing to sit with pain instead of running from it. Floorboards creaked, Pipes murmured. The wind pressed gently against the windows. Simple sounds, grounded in reality. In the entrance hall, the old mirror stood as it always had. No distortions, no messages, no second presence lingering just out of sync. It reflected exactly what stood before it. A woman marked by loss, eyes steady despite their sorrow, learning how to exist inside a truth that would never become easy. Sophia paused there for a long moment, breathing slowly, anchoring herself in the present. This was not redemption. This was not forgiveness. It was something quieter and harder, a beginning shaped by responsibility, humility, and the resolve to live honestly. Then she turned away from the mirror and walked forward, taking her first deliberate steps into a life built not on illusion, but on acceptance, carrying her sister with her, not as a shadow, but as memory. Story 2. I always return to the place I died. The number rose out of the dark like a verdict. 37. It flashed in her headlights, stark and unmistakable, painted in reflective white that seemed to glow too brightly for an ordinary road sign. K.H. Low Meridian felt her chest tighten before she even realized she was slowing down. Her foot eased off the gas, the car obeying reluctantly, as if it understood exactly where she was and why she didn't want to be here. This road had once been harmless, familiar. As a teenager, she had flown down this stretch laughing too loud, music blasting, chasing summer nights that felt endless. Mile markers had been milestones back then, little assurances that home was getting closer, that she'd made it through another night untouched. She used to count them under her breath, like a ritual against bad luck. But mile marker 37 was different. It had followed her into sleep for 10 years, appearing in dreams, in flashes of guilt she couldn't outrun. Even 3 years ago, driving home for her grandmother's funeral, she'd avoided this road entirely, adding miles just to keep that number out of sight. She told herself it was traffic, construction, anything but fear. Tonight, she had sworn she wouldn't stop. She was finally going to tell the truth, drive straight through, say the words she'd buried for a decade, end the lie that had quietly shaped her entire adult life. Then she saw her. A figure stood just beyond the sign, barely visible at first, a thumb lifted in silent appeal. As K.H. Low drew closer, the shape sharpened into a young woman, early 20s maybe, wearing a pale summer dress utterly wrong for the cold, still night. She didn't wave, didn't step forward. She simply waited motionless, as if patience itself had carved her into place. K.H. Low's hands locked around the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at her to keep going. It was close to midnight. The road was empty. Cell service was unreliable. She was alone, vulnerable. The figure could be anyone, and nothing about this situation was safe. But something about the woman's posture held her captive. The way her shoulders folded inward, guarding something unseen. The slight tilt of her head, as if she were listening for footsteps that never came. The stillness, unnatural, timeless, like someone who had been standing there far longer than any human ever should. K.H. Low didn't remember deciding to stop. She only knew she was suddenly pulling onto the gravel shoulder, tires crunching loudly in the quiet. The sound sent a shiver through her, too familiar, too close to another memory she'd spent years locking away. Another car, another night, another moment that ended beside this same stretch of road. The woman approached the passenger side window without haste. Up close, her features stirred something deep and sickening in K.H. Low's chest. The curve of her jaw, the way her hair caught the light. It felt like recognizing a face you pray you'll never see again. "Are you heading north?" the woman asked softly. Her voice was calm, polite, too steady. K.H. Lowe nodded, throat tight. The door opened. The woman slid into the seat, bringing with her the faint scent of damp earth and cold air. She folded her hands neatly in her lap, eyes forward. They drove in silence. After a mile, the woman spoke again. You always slow down here. K.H. Lowe's breath caught. Have we met? The woman turned then, studying her with an intensity that made the road blur. Not exactly, she said, but I've been waiting for you. The car drifted slightly. K.H. Lowe corrected it too fast, heart pounding. That's not funny. I know, the woman replied gently. None of this is. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but the air inside the car felt heavy, pressurized. Mile marker 38 passed, then 39. K.H. Lowe waited for relief that didn't come. I died here, the woman said quietly. K.H. Lowe slammed the brakes. The car screeched to a stop, engine roaring in protest. K.H. Lowe turned, shaking. The passenger seat was empty. Her door was closed. The road was silent. No footprints, no movement. Just the number 37 glowing behind her in the distance. K.H. Lowe sat there for a long time, hands trembling, tears burning hot and sudden. She knew now what she had always known. She had stopped here once before, 10 years ago. A stormy night, a girl by the road, a choice she'd made in fear. And every night since, in dreams she never remembered fully, she crawled back to this place. Tonight, she finally put the car in park. She stepped out, legs unsteady, and walked toward the sign. The air felt colder there, heavier. At the base of the marker, half hidden in weeds, was a shallow depression in the earth, a place where something or someone had been dragged. I'm sorry, K.H. Lowe whispered into the dark. The road didn't answer, but for the first time in 10 years, the silence didn't feel accusing. It felt like permission to finally stay. She stood there like she had grown out of the road itself, too still, too perfectly placed. The light from the headlights washed over her, turning her skin almost translucent, the kind of pale that didn't speak of cold nights but of long ones. The dress she wore hovered somewhere between white and faded yellow, shifting gently in the breeze, moving the way fabric does when it's remembered rather than worn. It felt borrowed from another era, from summers that existed before cell phones, before caution, before consequences. K.H. Lowe lowered the window. The night rushed in, and with it, a smell that made her stomach tight. Stagnant water, rotting leaves. The quarry in August, when the heat pressed down and the surface stayed calm while everything underneath slowly spoiled. It was the scent of things hidden too long, of truths pushed beneath still water and left there to soften and decay. Where are you going? K.H. Lowe asked, startled by how even her voice sounded, as if her body hadn't realized yet that it was afraid. The answer came without hesitation. Where you're going. The accent struck her harder than the words. Familiar, local, the same flattened vowels K.H. Lowe had trained herself to erase when she left this town behind. And then came the part that made her chest tighten. If you'll have me. Not if you don't mind. Not if it's okay. If you'll have me. As though this wasn't about a ride. As though it was a test. The woman didn't step closer. She didn't wave. She stayed rooted to that exact spot, like the road itself had claimed her, waiting for permission that went beyond an unlocked door. K.H. Lowe felt it then, that quiet, sinking certainty that this moment had already happened once before, that she was only replaying something she'd sworn never to repeat. She nodded before she understood why. Her hand reached across the car, fingers moving on their own, and the passenger lock clicked open. The sound cracked through the night like a verdict. Final. Unavoidable. Only then did the woman move, gliding around the front of the car with an ease that didn't match the gravel under her feet, her reflection sliding across the hood like a memory trying to re-enter the present. And as she reached for the door, K.H. Lowe realized with a slow, creeping dread that she wasn't picking up a stranger. She was reopening something that had never truly let her go. She didn't walk so much as drift, her body moving with a smoothness that erased the sound of her footsteps entirely. Gravel should have crunched beneath her weight, but the road remained mute, as if it refused to acknowledge her presence. Her dress continued to sway in slow, mesmerizing ripples, even though the air had gone completely dead, the night holding its breath. The moment the passenger door swung open, the warmth inside the car collapsed. Cold rushed in like a living thing. K.H. Lowe inhaled sharply and saw her breath bloom white in front of her face. Panic crept up her spine as thin veins of ice began to appear along the edges of the windows, spreading outward in delicate, branching patterns. It looked intentional, almost deliberate, like something tracing symbols meant for eyes that understood them. The woman slid into the seat beside her. The chill deepened, but it wasn't the cold that unsettled K.H. Lowe most. It was the smell. Up close, it was unmistakable now. Standing water left untouched for too long, damp soil turned sour, and beneath it all, a faint sweetness that made her stomach twist. The scent of rot hidden under perfume, of flowers decaying in dark rooms, of things sealed away and forgotten, never meant to be disturbed again. "Thank you," the woman said calmly. Her voice was steady, practiced. She reached for the seat belt and fastened it with slow, precise movements, each motion unnervingly exact, as if she were following instructions memorized long ago. When she finished, she folded her hands neatly in her lap. "I've been waiting for someone to stop," she added without urgency, without relief, as if waiting were simply part of her existence. As the car began to move, K.H. Lowe finally allowed herself to look at her. The woman's profile struck her like a sudden memory, something familiar but unreachable. The angle of her cheek, the tilt of her head. It stirred a recognition that came without context, the kind that bypasses logic entirely. A hollow ache opened in K.H. Lowe's chest, a sensation reserved for moments when the mind realizes it is seeing something that shouldn't be here. Her hands shook as she guided the car forward. In the mirror, the reflective sign behind them, mile marker 37, shrunk into the distance, then vanished into darkness, as though the road itself were erasing evidence. The night felt unreal now, suspended somewhere between recollection and waking life. K.H. Lowe swallowed and forced herself to speak. Silence felt dangerous. "How long were you standing out there?" she asked, aiming for casual, aiming for human. The answer came instantly. "A long time." No explanation, no emotion, just certainty. A deeper chill spread through K.H. Lowe's body, one that had nothing to do with the frozen air creeping along her skin. Her foot hovered over the accelerator as the road stretched endlessly ahead, and for the first time, she wondered whether she was still driving forward, or whether, somehow, she had already crossed a line she would never find again. Her foot eased off the gas without her realizing it, the car slowing as if responding to a fear she hadn't yet named. "Since when?" she asked, though every part of her already dreaded the answer. The woman turned toward her. For the first time, their eyes met, and K.H. Lowe felt the night buckle. Those eyes were unmistakable, that rare blend of amber and green, the color that caught light in strange ways. The color K.H. Lowe saw every morning in her own reflection, a trait passed down through her grandmother, who used to say they were eyes meant to notice what others ignored. But these eyes were wrong. They held no warmth, no uncertainty. There was something frozen inside them, alert, ancient, and endlessly patient, a gaze that had been waiting, watching, knowing. The accident, the woman said. Her voice carried no doubt, no hesitation, just finality. The one you never speak about. K.H. Lowe's throat closed. Words crowded her mind, denials, excuses, demands, but none of them escaped. Before she could form a single sound, the car erupted with noise. Static exploded from the speakers. K.H. Lowe flinched hard, her grip tightening as the steering wheel jerked and the car drifted dangerously toward the opposite lane. She corrected just in time, heart hammering. She hadn't touched the radio. She was sure of it. She'd kept it off the entire drive, choosing silence over the risk of stumbling into a memory she wasn't ready to face. But now the speakers hissed and crackled, filling the car with something worse than music. Voices, thin, distorted, as if dragged through water, as if pulled from a place too far away to reach the present intact. Then the words came through clearly. You're satisfied with too little, Danny. You've always been satisfied with too little. K.H. Lowe gasped as if struck. Her chest seized, breath leaving her in a rush. That voice, she knew it. Every inflection, every sharp edge. It was hers. Younger, angrier, alive with the fury of a night she had buried and tried to forget. The exact sentence she had hurled across this very car years ago. The argument that came before the scream of tires, before the sudden silence, before the moment everything shattered. Her hands shook violently as the car swerved again, tires skimming the edge of the lane before she forced it back into place. Turn it off, she breathed. The words barely made it past her lips. The woman beside her didn't move. She didn't reach for the controls. She didn't react at all. She sat perfectly still, head slightly tilted, listening with quiet attention, as if the radio weren't unraveling someone's worst memory but playing something familiar, something cherished. And in that stillness, K.H. Lowe understood with terrible clarity. This wasn't a replay. It was a reminder. And it wasn't finished yet. The signal didn't stop. It kept going, snapping from moment to moment with cruel accuracy, like a blade finding every weak place at once. Maybe this just isn't working anymore. Then his voice followed, calm, gentle, still trying. I just want you to be happy, Chloe. I don't know why that's never enough. The sound hollowed her out. Something inside her chest splintered, sharp and sudden, like frozen glass giving way. Do you remember this? The woman beside her asked. For a heartbeat, so fast Chloe almost dismissed it as a trick of light, the hitchhiker's face twisted. Terror ripped through her features, eyes stretched wide, mouth open in a soundless scream, the expression of someone realizing too late that there would be no escape. Then it was gone. Her face smoothed back into calm, as untouched as a still lake. Chloe locked her eyes on the road. The edges of her vision pulsed and warped. The yellow lines rippled like living things, bending and writhing just beyond where she dared to look. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Liar. The word was whispered with unsettling tenderness. Not angry, not loud, certain. You remember all of it, the woman continued. Every sentence, every sharp edge you chose instead of mercy, every moment you could have softened and didn't. The radio clicked again. Music filled the car. A song from that summer. One Danny used to hum without realizing it. Grease streaked across his hands, sunlight baking the driveway. He understood engines the way some people understood prayer, by feel, by instinct, by patience. But beneath the melody was something else. Breathing, wet rags struggling, the sound of air forced through something broken. Stop, Chloe said, her voice cracking despite herself. Please stop it. She hated how weak she sounded. Hated that this stranger, this impossible mirror, could see straight through her. This isn't a trick, the woman said softly. There's no winning here, only remembering. She smiled then, not wide, just enough. A smile that fed on Chloe's unraveling. This is what remembering feels like. Chloe glanced at the dashboard clock. 15 minutes, maybe less. But the drive felt endless, stretched thin like time inside a nightmare. The road ahead refused to change. Every curve revealed more asphalt, more darkness, more miles that never seemed to pass. And somewhere deep inside her, Chloe understood the truth she had spent years outrunning. The road wasn't taking her forward anymore. It was taking her back. The road seemed to offer her up, mile after mile, like an altar where the woman beside her could strip away the careful forgetting K.H. Lowe had wrapped around that night. She had worn that forgetting like armor, like scar tissue grown thick over something that never truly healed. The trees crowded in close now, their branches knit together overhead, swallowing the stars and narrowing the world until the highway felt less like a road and more like a passageway. A tunnel. No exits, no sky, just forward motion and nowhere else to go. Sometimes the headlights caught glimmers in the brush, pairs of eyes flashing back at them. Deer, maybe, raccoons, ordinary creatures of the night. And yet the way they watched felt wrong, too steady, too aware, as if they recognized the car, as if they were waiting. Tell me about Danny Kowalski, the woman said. Her voice lingered on the name, tasting it, savoring it, hungry. The sound shattered something fragile inside K.H. Lowe. The calm she had been clutching split clean through. Danny Kowalski. 10 years, a decade without hearing it spoken aloud. She had locked that name away, reduced him to safer shapes in her mind. The boy. What happened? The reason I never come back. Even alone in the dark, when guilt flooded her chest and stole her sleep, she had never let herself say his name, as if refusing it might keep the night from becoming real, as if silence could rewrite what had already been done. I don't know anyone like that, she said. The lie slid out smoothly, practiced, automatic, but it rang empty even to her. Another lie, the woman replied gently. You really are skilled at them, aren't you? She reached forward and tilted the rearview mirror. K.H. Lowe's breath caught. Both faces stared back at her in the dim glow of the dashboard, too similar to deny. Same eyes, same mouth, same bones beneath the skin. One worn thin by time and restraint, the other untouched, preserved, waiting. Two versions of the same person, divided by 10 years of running. 10 years of carefully avoiding anything that might demand honesty, or vulnerability, or loss. I imagine you had plenty of practice, the woman continued. The sound from the radio grew louder. Breathing. Rough, uneven, desperate. And then K.H. Lowe realized, her stomach twisting, that the rhythm matched her own heart. Each gasping inhale rose and fell in time with her pulse, as if the car itself were breathing with her. Or as if something else was reminding her how it felt when someone couldn't. The sound pulsed in perfect sync with her heart, so intimate it felt as though it were rising from inside her ribs instead of the speakers. Panic fed on itself. Breath became shallow. The world narrowed until K.H. Lowe felt trapped inside her own skin, sinking without water, choking without hands at her throat. "I was 19, the woman said calmly. Her tone softened, almost reverent, like someone repeating words memorized long ago, words worn smooth by repetition. He was born in early spring. Never believed much in signs or stars, but his mother liked to tease him about it. Said he belonged to the water. He could stay under longer than anyone else at the quarry. Always could." Each detail struck with cruel accuracy. Not shouted, not accused, simply stated. And with every sentence, another layer of forgetting peeled away, raw and bleeding beneath. There was something deeply wrong with the way she spoke, too precise, too detached, like an inventory, like a report. Not the way someone talks about a boy who laughed too loud, dreamed too big, and once trusted the wrong person with his heart. "He worked at the lumber yard," she went on, smiling wider now, too wide. Her teeth gleamed unnaturally in the low light. "Started right after graduation. Wanted to save up. Thought he'd study engineering someday. He liked fixing things, understanding how pieces fit. His boss said he'd never seen anyone learn that fast." K.H. Lowe swallowed, her throat burning as if lined with sand. "How do you know this?" she whispered. The woman turned fully toward her. "I was there," she said, "in the car that night." Her face shimmered, just for a second, like an image losing focus. "I felt his neck give way. I tasted the blood. I heard him say your name while the air left his lungs. He kept calling you, asking why you wouldn't answer, why you wouldn't help him." "No," K.H. Lowe breathed. "You're lying." The woman tilted her head, curious, almost kind. "Then why are you crying?" K.H. Lowe lifted her hand and froze. Her fingers came away wet. She hadn't felt the tears start, but now they poured freely, hot, bitter, unstoppable. They tasted like salt and years wasted running, like regret that had fermented in the dark, waiting for this exact moment. The radio kept playing. Voices, words, fragments of that night, stitched together with merciless care. Every sound dragged her closer to the truth she had buried, forcing her to listen, to remember, to finally face what she had left behind on that road and never crawled back for, until now. The radio refused to let the past stay buried. Song after song bled into the car, melodies from that ruined summer stacking on top of one another like accusations. Familiar tunes soaked in nostalgia, warped now, poisoned by what lay beneath them. Under every chorus came that sound again, the uneven pull of air, each breath thinner than the last, like life slipping through cracked fingers. "He loved the quarry," the woman murmured. Her voice softened, almost affectionate, the way people speak when they want to preserve something fragile. Weekends meant water and sunlight, swimming, fishing, wasting entire afternoons on warm stone, talking about nothing important and everything at once: cars, girls, the future. He was always the strongest swimmer, could disappear beneath the surface longer than anyone else. They'd start to panic, thinking he was gone, and then he'd burst back up laughing, gasping, hair slicked back, skin shining. K.H. Lowe's grip tightened until her hands ached. The road tunneled forward through dense woods, trees crowding close as if they were leaning in to witness her undoing. Shadows slid across the windshield in slow, deliberate movements that didn't match the sway of the branches. "He had a tattoo," the woman continued, her tone gentle. "Got it the day he turned 18, a knot on his shoulder. His mother cried when she saw it, not out of anger, but because it meant her son was changing, becoming someone she couldn't protect the same way anymore. He said it stood for forever. Truth was, he just liked how it looked. The sound from the radio cut out abruptly. The silence that followed felt heavy, crushing, as if the air itself had thickened. Then the breathing returned, but wrong. Wet, ragged, desperate, like lungs filling instead of emptying. He drove his father's old sedan that year, the woman went on, unbothered. His own car was gone, wrecked in the spring. Wrong place, wrong moment, just like that night. K.H. Lowe's chest tightened until it hurt to inhale. Every word was a blade, carving away the defenses she had built one careful lie at a time. The road stretched on endlessly ahead, and beside her sat the past, patient, precise, and unwilling to be ignored any longer. The car rattled softly over the cracked asphalt, but the noise was drowned beneath the storm of voices, memories, and unspoken truths that filled the cabin. The insurance barely covered the loan, the woman whispered, her tone almost reverent. So he borrowed his father's car whenever he wanted to take you somewhere nice. Embarrassed by it, older than him, smelling of cigarettes, prone to stalling at red lights, but he kept it spotless. Gas tank full, every time. Chloe's hand trembled on the wheel. "Please stop," she whispered, the sound barely making it past her lips, swallowed by the ragged rhythm of her own heartbeat and the relentless pulse spilling from the speakers. "He was going to ask you to move in," the hitchhiker continued, voice soft, dreamlike, as though painting a scene from a film rather than recounting the final plans of someone who would never come home. "Had already spoken to his landlord about adding your name to that tiny apartment above the hardware store. 2 rooms, kitchenette with the smell of sawdust and paint thinner, yours together. He thought maybe it would save you both money. Maybe even get married once he finished his apprenticeship. Steady work. A life built step by careful step." The road ahead twisted sharply left, the same curve, the exact geometry of catastrophe that had haunted Chloe's nights for a decade. Her foot eased from the accelerator, body responding before mind could intervene, muscle memory remembering disaster. He had it all planned, the hitchhiker breathed, her smile somewhere between beauty and nightmare, eternal and unbearable. How he would ask, what he would say. Waiting until after college so you wouldn't feel trapped. But he couldn't bear the thought of you leaving him behind with only memories and the faint scent of your perfume on his pillow. Chloe's voice rose despite herself. "Stop it," the words trembled, half command, half plea, while a part of her knew losing control was exactly what this impossible figure craved. "Poor sweet Danny," the woman said, voice dripping with mock pity, venom beneath velvet. "Planning a future with the girl who would kill him. Bobby's, mortgages, growing old together, all while sitting next to his murderer." "It was an accident," Chloe whispered, but the words felt hollow, a fragile echo. Hollow as if spoken into a canyon that returned only mockery, powerless against the truth she'd spent 10 years hiding. The night pressed in around her like a living thing, dark and suffocating, the hum of the tires on asphalt sounding impossibly loud in the silence of the cabin. Was it really that simple? The woman beside her asked, turning slowly to meet Chloe's eyes. Those amber-green eyes, too sharp, too knowing, stared back at her with a merciless clarity, reflecting every corner of her guilt like a mirror she couldn't look away from. "Tell me," the voice hissed softly, yet every word hit like a hammer. "Not the version you've been telling yourself for 10 years. The real story, every selfish, cowardly detail." Chloe's chest tightened as the sound from the radio faltered, each rasping breath a ticking countdown towards something she could feel in her bones, a moment she had tried to bury, but which had been creeping back to claim her all this time. Her own voice, trembling and raw, barely rose above a whisper. We'd gone to the quarry a Saturday in August. Hot, sticky, air thick like water. Danny picked me up in his father's car after work around 5. We brought a cooler, beer, and sandwiches his mother made. The memory sharpened with cruel precision. She could see him now. The sunburned tip of his nose, hair bleached by the summer sun, eyes lit with that easy contentment that comes from finishing a week of honest work and knowing you've earned 2 days of freedom. The hitchhiker's tone softened, almost coaxing like a priest guiding a confession. Tell me about the fight. Her throat felt like shattered glass. It started over something stupid. Amy Kellner called him while we were there. His ex from high school, calling on and off all summer even though they'd broken up years ago. I could see it in his face, the conflict, the politeness battling the desire to avoid drama. He let it go to voicemail, but the look he gave me, apologetic, like he was responsible for her obsession, that made me angry. Why? The woman asked, calm but merciless. Chloe swallowed hard. Not jealousy, not even that. Amy, she was unstable, confused intensity for love. Couldn't understand why anyone would want out of the chaos she created. And I was angry because I thought he should have known better. I thought he should have protected us from her. And I lost control. The road curved sharply ahead, and the shadows of the trees leaned closer, black fingers brushing the headlights, as if the forest itself were listening. Each word Chloe spoke, each confession dragged from her, layered the past over the present until the boundaries blurred. She could almost feel the weight of that day pressing on her shoulders, the heat, the smell of stagnant quarry water, the echo of laughter turning to screams that had never left her memory. The woman beside her smiled faintly, a tilt of lips that was both comforting and horrifying. You remember everything, don't you? Every word, every choice, every hesitation, every moment you could have been better and chose otherwise. Chloe's hands tightened on the wheel. The road ahead seemed endless, the dark canopy pressing down, but she couldn't look away, couldn't stop speaking, as if the only way to survive was to let every buried truth rise to the surface and confront her at last. The car coasted along the shoulder, headlights skimming the familiar guardrail, the same stretch where Danny's father's Buick had ripped through the metal a decade ago. The scars had been repaired, but Chloe's mind traced the dented steel and the scarred earth where the car had tumbled, a permanent imprint on memory she could never erase. But that's not really why you were angry, is it? The voice beside her shifted, soft but hungry, pressing into the raw edges of her guilt. Chloe's chest tightened. No, that wasn't it. The words scraped from her throat, bitter and reluctant, like pulling a splinter from a wound that had festered too long. I was 22, thought I knew everything about life, about love. I imagined it as this grand, transformative thing, something that was supposed to change you, make you more than you were. And Danny, he was just Danny. Sweet, funny, uncomplicated. He wanted ordinary. He wanted baseball, laughter, quiet nights in a town where everyone knew everyone's business. And I thought that was small, inferior, shameful. The memory settled around her like smoke, thick and choking. She could see him now, hands perpetually stained with sawdust and wood varnish, dreaming of night classes while working full-time at the lumberyard. Modest dreams, achievable plans, somehow unbearable to her younger self. So you decided to hurt him, the woman pressed, voice calm but edged with an unspoken accusation. Chloe's hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. I thought I was telling the truth. I told him I needed more than he could give, that I was leaving for graduate school in Boston, that he couldn't wait for me and settle for the life his parents had built. The words spilled out of me with the certainty of righteousness, with the arrogance of youth. I thought I was justified. The hitchhiker's eyes glimmered in the dashboard glow, patient and merciless. And how did that feel, watching him fall apart? Chloe closed her eyes. The memory hit like a fist. Danny's face, crumpling, hope bleeding from every line as if her ambition had ripped something vital from him. Her chest tightened, guilt twisting through her ribs like a live wire. She had left him dreaming, yes, but also broken, crushed by a cruelty she hadn't recognized until now. The road stretched ahead, dark and unending, and the weight of that night settled over her like a storm cloud she could never outrun. I watched him then, clear as day, the way his smile faltered and fell away, replaced by that hollow, desperate look that made your chest tighten just to remember. His hand reached across the center console, trembling slightly, trying to touch me, to pull me back, to fill the widening space I had carved between us. I felt powerful, I admitted, and even saying the word tasted like poison. Powerful, like I was finally standing in the light of my own desires instead of drifting in someone else's shadow, like I'd been doing for far too long. And then he tried to fight it. He tried to win me over with laughter, with impressions, jokes, anything to recreate the easy rhythm we'd shared all summer. His humor wasn't a joke. It was a desperate plea. He thought if he could entertain me enough, if he could make me forget the distance between my ambitions and his modest dreams, I'd stay. I could almost smell the quarry on his skin, hear the strained edge in his voice as he performed for me, like a jester hopping to charm a queen who had already decided her verdict. It was pathetic, I whispered, and the word lingered between us, ugly and unforgiving, burning with the honesty I'd refused to feel for 10 years. So you kept hurting him. The voice beside me was soft, patient, but sharp enough to cut through my defenses. Yes, I told him what I believed was the truth, that he was content with too little, that his dreams were small, and his world limited to beer and weekends at the lumberyard, that maybe we weren't meant to be together, that maybe I needed someone who could see the world beyond this town. Each syllable had been a blade, delivered with precise cruelty. I had watched the hope drain from his eyes with every sentence, as if he were a vessel slowly emptied of everything that mattered. And what was he doing while you tore him apart? He tried to drive, tried to focus on the road, on the mechanics of the car and the familiar curves, while I dismantled the life we'd been quietly building together. He kept glancing at me, searching for any sign that I'd retract, that the words were only anger, only a temporary storm. But you weren't going to take it back. No, I admitted, voice steady now, shaking in a way that made the admission taste like ash. I wasn't going to take it back. I had made my choice and I would see it through, no matter the cost. The road ahead curved sharply, the same arc where fate had tilted and shattered. And in that moment, the memory pressed in on me, the full weight of what I had done, and the truth I had spent a decade running from. I clutched the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white, as if gripping it could hold back the weight of memory. I had clung to my anger, convinced it was courage, convinced that hurting him was the only way to be honest with myself, to be brave, to survive. Then the radio crackled and his voice, Danny's voice, filled the car like a presence sitting right behind me. Come on, Chloe, don't be like this. Let me make you laugh. You know you want to smile. It was patient, loving, desperate, and it shattered something deep in my chest. I pulled the car over, killing the engine, unable to drive while his ghost spoke from the speakers, so vivid that my ears ached with regret. That's when you saw the deer, the hitchhiker murmured, her tone calm but unrelenting. Yes, I said, voice trembling. But even as I spoke, I knew it wasn't entirely true. The real truth was uglier, more unforgiving than I'd ever admitted. Except that's not quite right, is it? She said, reading my thoughts with eerie precision. You didn't see the deer first. You made a choice first, and then the deer appeared. The radio hissed, a wet, desperate breath now, fatting in and out. Yet beneath it I could hear him again, calling my name, weak and lost. Tell me about the choice, she demanded, her voice steady, absolute, leaving no room for denial. I closed my eyes, letting the memory surge forward, raw and merciless. The single moment that had shattered everything. I had been looking at him, not the road. He was performing his ridiculous impression of Pete Fletcher, the lumberyard boss with his thick Boston accent, throwing wicked before every adjective. And it was funny. Despite my anger, despite my pride, I had felt it. The pull of laughter, the temptation to forgive him for loving a simple life. My hands shook, breath fogging in the unnatural chill that filled the car. And then I knew the truth. If I laughed, if I let him ease the weight off my chest, I would never leave. I would marry him, live in that tiny apartment above the hardware store, have his children, and spend every day wondering what I had sacrificed for ordinary happiness. I would become my mother, content with small pleasures, whispers of neighbors, and a life that felt safe but hollow. So I made a choice. I decided to stay angry, to cling to my rage like armor against his kindness, his gentle soul, his terrible, ordinary contentment. And that's when I saw it. The deer. The memory came back with brutal clarity, tearing through her chest like shrapnel. She saw it now, massive, proud, frozen in the headlights just past the bend. Antlers like jagged crowns, catching the light and glinting like bone polished by the moon. I should have seen it sooner, she admitted to herself. But I wasn't looking at the road. I was watching Danny, watching him perform little jokes, little faces, trying to make me laugh. And when my eyes finally snapped back to the asphalt, there it was, too late to brake, too late to stop, but not too late to swerve, not yet. Tell me about those 3 seconds, the hitchhiker said, her voice quiet but sharp, threading into every nerve in Chloe's body. The 3 seconds stretched like ice over fire, the deer frozen like a shadow sculpture in the middle of the road. Danny reaching across, hands brushing the wheel, whispering her name, not in panic, not in fear, but with that soft, desperate care that had always made her stomach twist. Time slowed, a heartbeat, 2. The air itself seemed to wait, holding its breath for the choice she would make. I jerked the wheel left, harder than reason allowed. The car leaned violently, tires protesting against the asphalt, the guardrail barreling toward us like a steel river. My stomach turned as I realized. I had maybe 3 seconds to right it, to save us both, to just clip the deer. The hitchhiker leaned closer, eyes gleaming, not cruel, not quite, but hungry in that patient, inhuman way. But you didn't correct it, she said softly. No, I didn't. Why? Her own voice trembled, almost swallowed by the darkness outside the windshield. Because it was easier, she whispered, the words scraping raw against her throat. If the car rolled, if something terrible happened, I wouldn't have to choose. I wouldn't have to break him. I wouldn't have to disappoint him, watch him beg me to stay. The crash would decide it for me. So you let it roll. So I let it roll. Silence fell like a shroud. Even the radio's last ragged breath faded, leaving only the cold, hollow air of the car. Chloe sat frozen, the impossible passenger beside her, and felt the full weight of what she had carried all these years. Not just the guilt of the crash, but the monstrous selfishness of choosing her comfort over his life. And when the moment finally ended, When the echo of choice and consequence settled into the car like dust, the hitchhiker finally leaned back, a slow, almost satisfied smile curling at the edges of her lips. The reckoning had been spoken, the truth finally out, and there was no turning back. The hitchhiker's voice softened, patient and deliberate, like someone who had waited a lifetime to hear this confession in full. When it happened, I was upside down, trapped in the seat belt. The car had rolled just once, but it was enough. Blood coated my lips, my left arm had gone numb, and shards of glass littered the interior, catching the moonlight like fractured stars. I was alive, barely. And Danny, he was so still, his neck at an impossible angle. Blood streamed from his mouth, nose, ears, so much blood, but his chest, it was still moving. He was breathing, not fully, not steadily, but he wasn't dead yet. The words hit Chloe like a physical blow, splitting her chest open from the inside. What? He wasn't dead yet. I heard it then, the wet, desperate rasping of his breaths, the same sound that had haunted her car on the radio. He was trying, straining, calling her name, begging without words, and she had done nothing. How long did you wait before you crawled out? The hitchhiker asked, her tone gentle now, almost tender, like a mother guiding a child through an impossible truth. How long did you sit there, listening to him fight for life? Chloe swallowed hard, every memory a jagged blade cutting deeper than she had imagined. I don't know, 5 minutes, maybe 10, maybe longer, she admitted, voice breaking. The confession clawed its way out like poison long sealed inside her. I kept thinking if the breathing stopped, if it just ended, then I could call for help without explaining why I let the car roll, why I hadn't tried to save him. You were waiting for him to die, the hitchhiker said, soft, patient, devastating in its simplicity. I was waiting for him to die, so it would be easier for me. The words hung in the car like smoke from a dying fire. Every lie she had told herself over the last decade crumbled into dust. She had convinced herself he hadn't suffered, that it was instantaneous, that there was nothing she could have done. But now, face to face with the raw truth, she could no longer hide from what really happened in those endless, terrible minutes after the crash. He kept saying your name, the hitchhiker whispered, her voice almost a chant, a lullaby twisted with grief. Chloe, Chloe, are you? And in that suspended moment, with the cold air biting her skin and the shadow of the past pressing against every nerve, Chloe understood for the first time the full weight of her choice, and the life it had stolen before she even touched the ground. Okay, why won't you answer me? He thought you were unconscious. That was the only explanation that made sense to him. He believed that was why you stayed silent, why you didn't reach for him, why you didn't speak. It never crossed his mind that you were awake, listening, choosing. Stop, Chloe whispered, but the word was empty. She didn't truly want it to end. The truth had finally broken free, pouring between them like floodwater through a shattered wall. He was terrified, 19 years old, trapped in twisted metal, dying in the dark, and all he wanted was to hear your voice, to know you were still there, that you were safe. He would have forgiven everything, the argument, the cruelty, even the crash itself. All he needed was a few words while he slipped away. The woman beside her reached out and took her hand. The touch was unbearable, cold and burning at once, like ice driven straight into her bloodstream. But you couldn't give him that, could you? Not even that small mercy. You couldn't tell a dying boy that he wasn't alone. I was scared, Chloe said, though the excuse collapsed the moment it left her mouth. No, you weren't just afraid. You were calculating, measuring consequences, weighing his life against your future, and you chose yourself. Yes. The word fell heavy and final. like a sentence handed down in a silent courtroom. She had finally spoken the truth she buried for 10 long years, and the relief that followed was so intense it felt like another kind of death. And when you finally called for help, I crawled out through the shattered windshield, Chloe said quietly, walked back to the road, and you never told anyone what really happened. Never. She spoke faster now, as if confession itself had become a kind of oxygen. I packed my apartment the next morning, drove out of town early, changed my plans, my studies, chose a life where I could stay quiet, stay invisible. Small campuses, quiet buildings, shelves and silence. I kept moving, state to state, job to job. I thought distance could erase that night. The woman's grip tightened, gentle but unyielding, and with it, the last walls Chloe had built inside herself finally collapsed. But you're not running anymore. No, Chloe said, her voice steady for the first time. I'm going home. I'm telling my parents the truth. Then I'm calling the police. I'm confessing everything. Even if it means prison. Yes, even if it means prison. She exhaled, a long, trembling breath she'd been holding for a decade. He deserves the truth. His family deserves it. And I can't carry this any longer. It's been killing me slowly. She stared out into the darkness ahead, where the road stretched forward at last. And I think, she whispered, I think he would want me to finally do the right thing. The right thing. The woman's lips curved into a smile then, serene and horrifying all at once. It was the kind of expression worn by something ancient, something that had watched humanity long enough to lose any belief in mercy. Oh, you'll carry it, she said softly. You'll carry it into the station, into the courtroom, into the cage they lock behind you. You'll carry it every night when sleep refuses to stay quiet. You'll see his face. You'll hear him calling for you. You'll remember how close you were, how easy it would have been to speak, while you waited for death to make things simpler. What are you? Chloe whispered, though her chest already knew the answer. I'm what you created that night, the woman replied. I'm the part of him you erased twice, once with your hands on the wheel, once with your silence. I'm the truth you buried, the witness you tried to outrun. Her grip tightened until Chloe's fingers throbbed with pain. And now I'm here to make sure you never forget. Chloe swallowed. Will you leave after I confess? The laugh that followed was light and musical, and sharp enough to cut, like shattered glass stirred by the wind. Oh, Chloe, you still think honesty sets people free? The woman leaned closer, her breath icy against Chloe's ear. I'll walk beside you into that building, whispering how afraid he was. I'll sit through every word of testimony, reminding you what his body sounded like when it broke. I'll perch at the edge of your bed each night, telling you stories about a boy who died because you chose comfort over courage. The passenger door unlocked with a quiet click. Cold air poured into the car, heavy and alive, like the breath of something vast and starving. The woman stepped out onto the shoulder. Before leaving, she bent down, meeting Chloe's eyes one last time through the open window. Sleep well, she murmured, and try not to remember what it feels like to drown from the inside. Then she was gone, dissolving into the darkness beyond the guardrail, like fog or a memory that refuses to stay buried. But the cold lingered, so did the silence, and the unbearable weight of understanding. Chloe sat alone and realized the truth at last. Confession would not cleanse her. It would only make her sentence official. The radio hissed, then crackled back to life. A familiar voice filled the car, weak and pleading. Chloe, are you there? Please answer me. I'm scared. I don't want to be alone. Her hands shook as she turned the key, The engine came alive. She pulled back onto the road, driving toward home, while the sound followed her, unfading, unforgiving, carried with her into the dark. Danny's voice haunted her through the night, fragile and desperate, echoing in the shadows of her mind as she drove toward the town that had once felt like home, but now seemed like a gallery of guilt. Streetlights flickered over the asphalt, each one a marker of a memory she had tried to bury, moments stitched together on the spine of a life built atop his death. At the end of Maple Street, her parents' house appeared, warm light spilling from the porch like a promise she wasn't sure she deserved. They would be awake, waiting, cups of coffee between them, the crossword puzzle spread across the table, just as they always had. Before sunrise, she would speak. She would unburden herself. Then Detective Fletcher, a call that would start a chain of events she could no longer avoid. Lawyers, hearings, sentences, but truth would finally exist, raw and undeniable. And yet, as the weight of that reality pressed down, she realized that some truths are heavier than lies, sharper, more permanent. Freedom is not the reward of confession. Clarity is its own punishment. Pulling into the driveway, her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Movement, slow, deliberate, unrelenting. The hitchhiker had not left. She lingered beneath the streetlight, silent, patient, a predator waiting. She had only shifted her position, preparing to witness Chloe face the long reckoning she had postponed for a decade. The confession had not yet begun, yet its gravity pressed down on her chest, suffocating and precise. Chloe had believed that speaking the truth would unshackle her, but she now understood. Some truths are prisons, and some passengers never reach their final destination. From somewhere behind, faint but unmistakable, came the rhythm of ragged breathing, steady, inescapable, like a heartbeat marking the passage of a sentence that had already begun. The night wrapped around her, and Chloe knew with the cold certainty of inevitability that her journey was far from over.